Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you everyone for inviting Diane and myself to join you today. We are thrilled to be here, and Mark, thank you for asking people in the audience to raise their hands if you are a millennial. And Diane and I whispered to each other, the future is in the room. And so that is pretty cool. 20 years ago, it hurts us to say 2 decades ago, when Diane and I founded the Learning Café, because we are part of the ever young baby boomer generation. But 2 decades ago, when we founded the Learning Café, we did so with a specific mission. And our mission was to bridge the generation gap at work. And in the past 2 decades, that mission has taken us to over 120 corporations, federal government agencies, and nonprofit organizations. The original mission of helping people bridge the generation gap at work and be more collaborative and more productive at work has taken shape in the form of leadership training, building your brand information for millennials, and mentoring and reciprocal mentoring in organizations. Today, the flow of our time together will look like this. So we'll start out with a big picture of the workforce, and then we're going to dive into, so what is it we all need to know about this wonderful millennial group that we have in our world, in fact. And then from there, we're going to dive down one level deeper and explore how do we help millennials grow in our organizations, and how do we help them catch the vision and continue the rich legacy that many people in this room have started. And along the way, we'll look forward to some specifics. You have a handout, and we're looking forward to a terrific time with you. And now to get us off to a terrific start, Diane.
Absolutely. Thank you, Devon, very much. And let me ask you a question. Understanding that a generation grows up together, we experience events, we have images in our mind, we are influenced by things happening in the world around us. One of those things happens to be our popular culture, specifically music. So my first question for you this morning is, which of the following did you grow up with? And this is an opportunity to raise your hand, wave your hand in the air, and let us know. Those of you who grew up with rock and roll. Okay, a few of you. How about the Beatles? I'll put my hand up for that one. MTV. Okay, a few more. Excellent. Punk rock and grunge. Yahoo! I lived in Seattle for 13 years. You get to know a lot of different musics when you move around the country. How about MP3, Napster, and iPod that you grew up with? So the number of hands are going down just a little bit. And what you've just experienced, thank you for participating, is a shout out to the different generations in our workplace today. And we are literally shoulder to shoulder, network to network, cubicle to cubicle, however it is that you're working or wherever it is that you're working. About 85% of us are working with at least 3 different generations on a daily basis. Let me introduce them to you a little bit more formally, because we are certainly influenced by popular culture. We are also influenced by economics, history, demographics, and those demographics are shifting. And if you're starting with the left side of the timeline, let me introduce you to the silent generation, also known as the traditionals or the matures. This is the generation that grew up in the aftermath of the Depression and World War II. This is also the generation that can make 3 cups of tea from 1 tea bag. And about 53 million members of this generation. If in fact they are your parents or your grandparents, they may have packed your lunch for you, you took your brown sack to school every day, and you brought it home at the end of the day. And maybe on Friday it was dropped into the reduce, reuse, and recycle trash bin. The silent generation is followed by the, let's just say, bigger, more boisterous, bold, almost 78 million baby boomers. And it is hard to not notice a generation that has $2 trillion in spending power. Dads returned from World War II, moms started having babies, and we had a population explosion from the mid-40s through the mid-60s. And then the population began to decline. And during that decline, we experienced a doubling of our divorce rate, women returning to the workplace, birth control was readily available, and we have the much discussed and early on much maligned Gen Xers. And if the baby boomer generation is about 76 to 78 million strong, our Gen X population is considerably smaller at about 41 to 43 million. And that generation has given us great change in the workplace from a very small number of people. And perhaps the generation that you're most interested in learning a bit more about, unless of course you're a baby boomer and it's all about me, is the millennial generation. And coincidentally, or maybe not so much, the millennials are the children, by and large, of the baby boomer generation. And as we talked early on, they are the folks born between 1980 and about 2000. And what you're getting a sense of is that the science of generations is a social science. It is not exact. It is not precise. If some of you are having a moment of saying, I'm really not a baby boomer, I don't belong in Gen X, gosh, I always thought I was a millennial, you are probably somewhere in that 2 to 3 year cusp that falls between each and every generation. So while not exact, not perfect, not precise, it is a marvelous window through which to view the folks that we work with and that we spend our time interacting with each and every day. So a quick quiz. It's early, I know, and you're anxious to find out a little bit more about the people at your table, and we're anxious to find out a little bit about the people in the room. You'll see musical artists on the slide. Turn to the folks at the table group and see how quickly you can identify each of these musical artists. As soon as you know, please start to shout them out. Very informal. Want to know who they are. All right. So if we were to start in the upper left corner, you would see what musical artists? The Beatles. Excellent. In the center? On the far right? Tony Bennett and? Bonus points for the millennials who know who that is. Dropping down from Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga, we have Queen. Excellent. All right. In the center, below Elton John. Elton John, Britney Spears on the left. And the bonus question in the far left corner. Pussycat Dolls. There are millennials in the room. Absolutely. Fabulous recognition for everybody who got those artists. And some of you are saying, well, gosh, I'm not sure that contest was quite fair. My area of expertise is not music. It is, in fact, television. All right. And next to the Twilight Zone, on the right, in the center right, far right corner. Absolutely. On the left-hand side, Golden Girls. Yeah. How about in the far right corner? Doctor Who. Absolutely. And next to Doctor Who, moving back to your left. In between Star Trek and Doctor Who. Pretty Little Liars. So here's what I suggest you do. Just take a moment to look at the people sitting at your table. Take a moment to look at the people sitting in the room. Think about what you are noticing. And those of you who say, no TV at my house, we were at the movies. Woo! Sound of Music. E.T.
Yes.
All right. And I have not heard, as I'm listening to all of your responses, the movie that's in the upper left-hand corner. The Hustler. Excellent. Take a look around your table. Is anybody missing? How about just below the word movies? Toy Story. Toy Story 3. All right. Somebody's got children that they've taken to the movies. And in fact, others of you are saying movies, TV, that's all about pop culture. That's way too much time in front of the screen. I was busy outside participating in sports. So, who is the athlete in the center at the top? All the way at the top, Arnold Palmer, excellent. How about the tennis player on the far right? Yes, absolutely. And the baseball player on the far left? Willie Mays, excellent. Anybody know who's in the lower right-hand corner?
USA.
USA, and that is not Michael Phelps, that is which swimmer? Mark Spitz, that's right. And for the real sports enthusiasts, the soccer player in the center? Beckham, excellent. And the ice skater above him? Christy Yamaguchi, excellent, excellent. So again, take a moment and look at the people that you're sitting with. Take a moment and look around the room. What we know is that the more generationally diverse, the more opportunity we have to come up with different and a variety of ideas. We have greater opportunities to innovate. We have opportunities to think differently. We also have the opportunity to get more right answers as a generationally diverse group. The more co-gen you can be, the more unstoppable you will be as an organization or an association. And I'm going to have Devon just shift it over to her and have her talk a little bit about what we're noticing in the workplace today.
If we could helicopter you for a moment outside the walls of this beautiful room and float us all up to look at the U.S. broadly. So if you would imagine we're all floating and we're watching what's going on in our country more broadly. It might be a surprise to some of us that one of our fastest growing segments of our workforce is the segment that Diane referred to as the silents or the traditionalists. For a couple of reasons. This generation has discovered that indeed retiring is expensive. And also, many members of this generation are seeking the intellectual stimulation that comes with being in a workplace with many people from many generations. And we mention this particularly when we address the topic of millennial managers, because one of the things we've heard in our research is that millennial managers often say, I have a team that looks like a 4-generation Thanksgiving dinner. It looks like I've got, every generation of my family clustered in my workspace. And we often notice that it's easy to forget that this generation, in fact, is growing in numbers in our workplace. Now, the boomers in this room, some of you may recall the adage, don't trust anybody over 30. Now, every member of the baby boom generation is, in fact, over the age of 50. And we have invented some amazing things. Other generations thank us for creating the 50-hour work week. And what's interesting about our current demographic is that boomers, we are no longer the big dog in the workplace. Millennials have come en masse to our workplaces. However, boomers as a demographic are not retiring as rapidly as we had expected. Boomers are finding themselves with other responsibilities. They're finding that it's not yet time to retire. So this generation continues very much to be with us, and they are redefining how we look at retirement, and they're redefining how we look at even things like things around related to consumer spending. This is a generation that's driving consumption of experience versus goods and services in the economy, for example. So Generation X, you, at one time, when Diane and I started our work, you were the new kid on the block. And everyone was talking about this new generation coming into the workplace. Now, the oldest of your generation is solidly mid-career and middle-aged. And what we know that means in our organizations is that you're filling our talent pipelines. You're likely to be on the edge, if not senior leaders in your organization, and your influence and your clout, both regard to leadership and parenting, far exceeds the smaller numbers that you have in the population. As parents, we know some really interesting things about you. We know you're not a boomer parent. The way you're raising your children is actually quite different. And come back next year to learn more about Gen Z and all of the things that means. But your ethic around parenting has now become our dominant way of thinking about parenting in the US. And it's official, as Mark said, millennials are here. And with all of the power and the potential and the promise that this generation brings to us. So here we are at work every day, cubicle to cubicle, network to network, ideally collaborating, ideally innovating, and leading our organizations together. And we're also competing. We're also competing in the economy, in the US economy. We're competing for jobs. And we are sometimes crunching and bumping at work as well.
And the slide on the screen gives you some indication of what the U.S. workforce looks like right now. And the 2% is probably representative of not only the silent generation, but there are actually a couple of members of the veterans generation, more than a couple, I should say, who are still in the workplace. You've done the quick math. You know they're all past the traditional age of retirement. As Devon said, though, people are making choices to either return to the workplace or to stay in the workplace longer. When we started this work, about 50-some% of the U.S. workforce was a member of the baby boomer generation, and 51% of those baby boomers had no workplace interaction with the millennial generation, who are now 34% of our U.S. workforce. About the same percent as the Gen Xers. Absolute numbers kicked the millennials into the lead this year. And that post-millennial generation, there isn't a marketing company that has yet landed on the perfect name. We hear them referred to as Gen Z, the iGen, small I, capital G. You can probably figure out where that name comes from. But the post-millennial generation, or next gen, are about 1%. And if you're eating fast food or you're shopping retail, you're beginning to bump into the 5th generation about to enter our workforce. So you might think for yourself, if you were just going to take 2 seconds, 2 minutes, what challenges you about this multi-generational workforce, and or what excites you? And just take a moment to turn to the folks at your table and just register that. Is it a challenge? Is it exciting? Is it a mix or a blend of the two? And I'll bring us back together truly in 30 seconds. All right. And if I can possibly get us back together, if you could give me just a show of hands, is the generational diversity in your workplace more a challenge, more exciting? It's a both and. Challenging? Couple challenges. Exciting? Yeah. Both challenging and exciting. Great. Then you're set to share a little bit of insight. Devon and I have asked this question before. We've asked it actually quite a few times over a period of 10 years. And what we'd like to share with you is a little bit of the data that we've accumulated. And what we know is the first challenge that seems to bubble up, regardless of the audience, is about communication. And you can imagine in the workplace, we are dependent on good communication is good business. And we have a generation that grew up writing memos. And I don't know if you remember when a memo had paragraphs, punctuation, spell check, no hieroglyphics, words were spelled out in full, and we expected that that communication would come to us. And the baby boomers came into the workplace. Imagine really 76 million people flooding the workplace with passion, enthusiasm, and excitement, want to build relationships, network, and rapport, and let's have a meeting. It's the best way to do that. That's how we'll communicate. And as the Gen Xers came into the workplace, they're kind of tapping their toe. Really, another meeting? Are you kidding me? Just send me an email. We'd be done by now. And the millennial generation is arriving in the workplace with a speed that is yet to have been experienced. And frankly, if their mode of communication, of text messaging, speeds up the way things are happening or makes it more efficient, I, for one, am all for it. But as you can see, our medium and methods are different across the generations. Now, getting a little bit more serious beyond the memos or the text messages, A big piece of feedback is about, or a big piece of communication is about feedback. Imagine the silent generation in the workplace. No news is good news. Nobody hollering my name. I must be doing okay because, by the way, I put in a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. And the boomer generation, bless our little process-oriented hearts, we came into organizations and said, we'll have a feedback process. We'll document it. I'll tell you once a year how you're doing. Won't that be grand? Until the Gen Xers, who have pushed our thinking on workplace flexibility and really challenged us by saying, must I come to the work? Couldn't you bring the work to me? And in order to make that successful, I really do need to know how I'm doing. So imagine the Gen Xers kind of tapping the baby boomers on the shoulder and saying, can't wait till December, can't wait till July, need to know how I'm doing now. And the silent generation is thinking, what's all this thing about feedback? Really? And the millennial generation, 1/3 of whom are only children, who have been coached, taught, led, parented, at the center of many people's attention, came into the workplace expecting to hear rather frequently, how are we doing? And tell me quick, because I need that information. So as you think about communication, does your flexibility allow you to communicate with methods or medium that are different and perhaps more comfortable to others than they are to you? Does your flexibility allow you to up the pace of the feedback you're offering the people that are working with you? We know that frequency outweighs duration. 4 15-minute conversations about performance have more impact than one 1-hour discussion. So where are you in terms of communication? Are you stepping a little bit perhaps out of your comfort zone? The other area that comes up frequently is about our workplace climate. You might refer to it as the environment. I'm not talking about the humidity that is pervasive in southern Florida. I'm talking about the bubble that you create for the people that you work with and how it looks a little bit different. The silent generation put work first, and then their family delayed or deferred the gratification for themselves. So their attitude was, this is work, let's get it done. The boomer generation came into the workplace and actually quite aggressively began to climb the ladder to get to the top. And their view of work was that we live to work. We define ourselves by our career. So it really shouldn't surprise us when 86% of baby boomers say, I'm not going to retire. If I retire, who am I? And Gen X said, not so much. We believe that we can have work and our lives concurrently and on most days in balance. So Gen Xers work to live. They're followed by the millennial generation who said, work style, lifestyle, I'm wired 24/7, I'm accessible, have at it. So a blurring or a graying of the lines between work and life outside of work. Another piece of our workplace climate is our leadership style, what you're really here to talk about. And look how leadership styles have evolved. When the silent generation came into the workplace, working with members of the veterans generation, and I'm referring to the veterans of World War II, there was what some of us refer to as a command and control model, a tops-down leadership style. Some people call it 9-1 leadership. There was someone at the top of the organization who had the vision, the mission, what we were going to do. We were going to take that hill, and here's how we were going to take it. And the boomers came into the workplace and said, you don't have to tell me how to take it. If we get together as a group and collaborate with one another, we can figure that out. The Gen Xers, think about the Gen Xers, 51% latchkey kids, came home from work, let themselves into the house, toasted their cheese sandwiches, self-sufficient, independent, self-starting. They were on their own, and they're a little bit on their own in the workplace. Their leadership style tends to be a bit hands-off and a bit entrepreneurial. The question to ask Gen Xers right now is that hands-off leadership style bumping up with the millennial need for a bit more structure in the workplace and wanting to have a connection with their boss. Although the word they would choose is not boss. When asked, and we could check this out with the millennials in the audience, who do you want to work for? The first word is coach. The second is mentor. The third is friend. And to let all of you know that you can manage lead millennials and be led by them. Their fourth choice is reasonable adult. Covers most everybody in the audience. So for you, if you were going to take two, ask yourself, does my style allow me to contribute to a climate that is relaxed, that is efficient and effective, and perhaps most important, brings out the best in others? Devon and I will try very hard today to not ask you to change how you lead but we'll ask you to think about what flexibilities do you have to adapt and adopt to the changing different generations. And the final area that comes up quite frequently when we ask the question about what's challenging or exciting is about career. And it probably doesn't surprise you, the silent generation or the traditionals, a slow and steady career progression. When I'm ready for the next opportunity, somebody will tap me on the shoulder and let me know. I mentioned the baby boomers climbing that career ladder, looking for opportunities, kind of savvy navigators of the corporate hierarchy. They were going to get to the top. And the Gen Xers saw their parents, members of the silent generation, lose their jobs rather late in their career. And then they experienced the dot-com bubble/burst and a couple other recessions along the way. Gen Xers said, maybe the organization's not going to look out for me. I perhaps should look out for myself. So Gen Xers pursued a career lattice. I can step in, I can step out, I can go sideways. I have some options. And while I'm at it, I'm going to build a portfolio of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And the really savvy Gen Xers realized that those portfolios were portable. If they needed to go somewhere else, they could. Now, if we're climbing a ladder as a boomer, a lattice as a Gen Xer, I would suggest the millennials are climbing a jungle gym. And they are all over the opportunity. And that's how they've been raised. There's always some other challenge to delight, to inspire, to stimulate them. So they're following a career jungle gym. However, what it sometimes sounds like to us is, I want it all, and now would be better. And when I get it, I'll figure out what to do with it. What we've learned about millennials as they move through our organizations is that they're not necessarily looking for a promotion the way a baby boomer was. They're looking for a variety of experiences. Gen Xers are looking for options. The message from the baby boomers is sounding a little bit, pay your dues, put in your time, earn those stripes. That's what I had to do. And when we talked about the numbers, 76 million boomers, about 76 or 78 million millennials, only about 40, 41 million Gen Xers there in between. There aren't enough Gen Xers to fill the roles that the baby boomers are vacating or will vacate. So we're seeing millennials move into leadership roles perhaps more quickly than many of us did. And at the same time, they're moving into those roles in an organization where they oftentimes hear, just do the work, pay your dues, put in your time, it'll happen. Not something that excites and or inspires members of the millennial generation. So how did we get to be this way, if you will?
Every generation has a story. And as Diane was sharing some of the places we noticed the differences in the workplace, a question that people often ask us is, so what creates a generation anyway? So if you were to go back to your organizations today or tomorrow and someone were to say, yeah, did anybody talk about that? What you might share is that generations are created by demographers when the birth rate spikes or drops. In the US, sometimes we say, oh, a generation is, the kids of mom and dad and the grandkids. Each one of those is a generation. But a demographer is going to say, the reason we have the baby boom generation is we had a long, prolonged period of birth spiking, and then followed by the Xers, which was a drop in the birth rate. And each one of these cohorts, as demographers call them, has a story. And people sometimes say, well, why is it that members of this generation have some similar tendencies? And that's because we are hugely shaped as a generation by the things that occur both in our formative years. So I met a woman the other day and she said, my father, who was a member of the silent generation, had a box of string in the garage. And the name on the box was String Too Short to Be Saved. But he saved it anyway, because you never know when you might need a really short piece of string. And of course, the events that he would remember from his formative years were the aftermath of the Great Depression. And so we know what we'll do is share a bit of each generation's story with you, because when we go back to lead the folks in our workplace, as so many of you know, as you look around your tables, you see members of several generations, and there is a generational story attached to each one. So for the wonderful folks in our workplace who are members of the silent generation, we know that, of course, as we've just been talking, the members of this generation came of age in the aftermath of the Great Depression and World War II. And this is the generation that deferred gratification, said, nope, it's not about me, it is about us. In the workplace, this created some wonderful assets for us in the US, and that is, this is the generation that became the great natural team player. When we talk about work ethic, sometimes we hear people say, oh, they just don't have a very good work ethic, that person over there. We're often comparing them to members of the silent generation who said, I might have a cold, I might have pneumonia, I might be on my deathbed, I am going to work tomorrow. And by the way, I'm going to be there 15 minutes early, and I'm going to stay after my shift and help, the next guy get ready for his or her shift. So this wonderful generation, what we know about this generation is their preferred means of taking in information in our organizations continues to be traditional. The written word, the spoken word. In the media, we know this generation still responds to newspapers and television. Every once in a while, you say the word television to a millennial, and their brow furrows, and they're like, old media, right? Old content, right? I carry my content with me. What's with that? But we know that for our silent generation, a great way to respect this generation in the workplace is to understand that as part of their generational story, they may consume communication and content very differently than the other three generations. The baby boomer generation. So the baby boomer story famously is about rebellion. And for the sociologists in the room, I would guess we have quite a few actually, sociologists who study such things, can tell us that the parenting ethos of the people who parented the boomers was obedience. Well, that didn't work out, did it? Right? So boomers rebelled. And as a result, we had things that are with us today. Civil rights, women's lib, that the boomers helped give a big push to. Yeah. So thank you. And so we know that the boomers had these pushes, the Beatles that you identified with, Diane, on the slide. So we had, the boomers came of age in a time and crowded into careers that we called culture careers. A culture career is something like teaching, journalism, something that has an impact on our culture more broadly. And then the boomers went into the workplace. And for, like every generation, right, pluses and minuses. But we had someone, I think it was an Xer, who said to us once, yeah, boomers used to protest against the man, and then they turned into the man, right? And they came into our corporations, and they locked them down. We've got process, we've got this, we've got that. Okay, hey, we're in charge, that's awesome, right? So what we know is that for boomers, in youth and middle age, the success was measured by career attainment and progress. And today, boomers are a bit betwixt and between. Boomers are saying, I might have gotten myself into this 50-hour-a-week job, and I don't quite know how to get out of it at this point. Generation X. So Diane referred to you as the latchkey generation. We know that 51% of you did that grilled cheese sandwich and helped your little brother or sister get their homework going. Well, what happened with you, your story, is that you had that independence in your early years. And then you came to a workplace dominated by silents and boomers who had all these processes, all of this way to do things. And Xers, as you came into organizations, you were like, well, we've got a little bit of a different way here, right? Do we really have to get together for that all-day meeting, right? And so it was different for Xers. You found the workplace actually to be a bit micromanaging. And this generation to this day tends to have a high percent of entrepreneurs, people who think independently. We say you're the first generation that got the memo. And what that memo said is, because you watched mom and dad get laid off, you might have watched your family struggle financially. Mom went to work for the first time with her shoulder pads and her bow tie on her suit, right? And you saw that. And when you went into organizations, you said, no, I know you could lay me off. I'm going to do all those great things that you were talking with Diane about around career. So we say, Xers, you were the first generation to really get that memo. And then along comes our most child-centric generation in U.S. history. How many of you have heard of Dr. Spock? Yeah, okay. And were any of you parented with parents who'd read any of the Spock books? Or, yeah, right. So the deal with Dr. Spock is he said, don't beat the bejesus out of your kids, right? I mean, he had a different parenting way. And until then, parenting was kind of a disciplinary process. So Dr. Spock came along, had some ideas, and it was actually kind of lenient compared to previous parenting views. And then along comes our millennial generation. And millennials, you have been raised at a child-centric time. You may have grown up calling your parents' friends by their first names. So we shouldn't be shocked when you come to work and are not super-duper impressed with a title that sounds like president or board member or, right, leader. And yet, when you do that, the rest of us go, horrors. Yeah. So you come to us with a different sensibility. As well, millennials in this room, you were raised in a time when personal safety was very important and necessary, in fact. Some of you went to schools where you passed through a metal detector. Probably no other generation had to do that. And so we know that safety, where the boomers hid under their desks, right, in case of incoming bombs, right? That millennials, the safety factor was much closer at home. So here you come to us at work. You have been the recipient of high parental expectations. And so now this generation comes to us at work, and they are accomplishment-oriented. Some of them have done incredible work to get into the college of their choice. This is all but the best educated of this generation earn less at their age than every other generation did at the same age. So this generation is less well paid by every measure, with the very exception of the most highly educated. So they come to work and they say, yep, I'm used to, mom and dad asking me about how things are going, and, beyond getting my homework done, I got a coach to help me be a little better at writing my college prep essay. And now I'm at work and everyone is ignoring me. Well, what's with that? Yeah. So as Diane said, our goal is not to change the way you lead, but to share generational stories and then provide some ways that we can be flexible.
Absolutely. I just want to note that the coddled, cocooned, and chauffeured is not something the millennials initiated. It's something that was done for them. I don't want to lose our millennial audience immediately by suggesting that that's something they negotiated for, and getting back to the safety. And it also reminds us that this generation is our future. That's how we began this morning, and it is our legacy that we're leaving to them. And we are concerned, both professionally and personally, that there are some generalizations about the millennial generation. And if you're a millennial, what you might be experiencing is that when you walk into an organization, sometimes your reputation precedes you. Now, what Devon didn't say about herself is that she's got a great background in research. And I'm saying, well, let's just say this about the millennials. And she's saying, no, let's get some data, let's do some focus groups, let's interview some people, and let's cut to the chase on some of these. Are they myths and or are they misconceptions? What are the hits? What are the myths? As we know that in 2015, this year, half the employees in the world were born after 1980, we really do need to pay attention. So the first myth that we hear, or the first thing that we hear most often about the millennial generation is they are so entitled. Let me tell you that in China, the millennial generation is referred to as the littlest emperor generation. Entitled emperor, what we did is that, okay, let's find out. Let's talk to the millennials. And here's what they had to say in response to "you're so entitled." Yes, we're the trophy generation. Somebody wrote a book about it. They made a bundle of money, and they started to dismiss our reputation. We get it. Not everybody wins. Our parents changed the rules. We grew up in the middle of the empowerment years. Our parents wanted us to be confident, filled with self-esteem. So we'll have no losers. Everyone will be a winner. Thus, we have an expectation that we can have more, that we can all have more. We want to make a contribution so that the world is a better place to live. Oh, by the way, we'd like to make a big impact. The sooner the better. And we're not going to let our age hinder our success or get in the way of our success. If you've interviewed millennials, you may find them to be surprisingly confident. What they'll tell you is, we are optimistic that we can make a difference. So they're saying, entitled, not so much; optimistic, yes. Are they needy? Now, I have heard from an occasional Gen Xer that the millennials are pulling on my jacket. They want to talk to me. They want to spend time with me. They want me to tell them how they're doing. And the millennials are saying, we don't think we're needy. Here's what we suggest, leaders. Set expectations. Tell us what the vision is. What's the mission? Where are we going? Let us know how we're doing. Don't keep us in the dark. Devon mentioned that the baby boomers were a challenging generation, pushing back on our systems and structures. In contrast, the millennials tend to be somewhat compliant and are pleasers. So if we let them know how we're doing, they tend to do even better. So perhaps you amp up the number of performance reviews you're providing, or the curbside coaching, the feedback in the moment. Let them know in the big picture of things where they fit in and the difference that their contribution makes. We suggest that there's never been a generation that will more benefit from our coaching. So we would suggest, and the millennials will tell you, we're worth it. What else? Are they lazy? We talked a little bit about work ethic. Work ethic or work style looks different across the generations. What the millennials will tell you, we're not lazy at all. We're driven, we're ambitious. We have a desire to excel. We're just not willing to sacrifice our family, our friends, our free time only for work. And we believe that technology allows us to be not only more effective, but more efficient. Give us a bunch of things to do, we'll get them done. The more frequently we can task switch or change it up, the happier we are in the workplace. The bigger the challenge, the greater the stimulation, the more the variety. We are multitaskers. What else do we hear about the millennials? That they're not loyal. The first thing that I would suggest to you is that loyalty has changed. And if members of the silent generation were loyal to the organization, as were some of the boomers, when the boomers began to get downsized, right-sized, and outsized, they started to look at loyalty just a bit differently. When the Gen Xers entered the workplace, having already seen their parents lose their jobs, they were pretty certain that the loyalty was to the work, the project, and perhaps the person they were working for or the team that they were a part of. The millennials, a collegial, collaborative generation, is coming into the workplace. The first 2 years, if you really want to engage and retain, it's that relationship the millennial builds with their immediate supervisor or boss. The millennials would suggest it's not about loyalty. We're simply very deliberate. Loyalty is something that needs to be earned. So if you would teach us, challenge us with the work that we're doing, again, paint us into that vision, provide us with feedback, updates, let us know what's going on. And if you could tell us what opportunities lie ahead, what can you see in the future for us? Do we have the skills that we need? They would be delighted. They would suggest to us that you need to learn or need to earn our loyalty. And finally, the one where not so sure I'm convinced. Are they social media junkies? What the millennials say is we're connected. So let's get over it, okay? We happen to be social. We grew up social, exploring, communicating, sharing with one another. We want to share our success. Thus, we have clients who are posting recognition on their employees' Facebook pages. We discuss our private lives. It's not so secret. Knowledge is abundant. It's to be shared with everyone. We want to advance our careers. If social media helps us do that, then let's have at it. By the way, if you want to recruit into your organization, the millennials and their connectedness to social media are the best recruiters you could have. Our suggestion is just harness the power that they have and bring it into the organization. So social media junkies are connected. Maybe it's somewhere in between. What we do know is they are absolutely connected. So what does this mean to us? If we know a little bit more about them, we can dispel some of the stereotypes or make sure that those generalizations don't become stereotypes. We have been collecting data for the better part of 12 years on what is it that really engages, what captures the millennials' interest and attention. The top 3 things out of 24 are listed in green on the slide. Give millennials challenging, stimulating work. It's all about the work. That's what brings actually each and every one of us into the workplace every day, or brings the work to us, depending upon how you're working. But it's that opportunity to learn, to grow, and to develop. About 68% of millennials would choose a job because it has the opportunity for further growth and development. Notice I didn't say further advancement or further promotability. It's the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to develop. And millennials don't take work quite as seriously as some of us do. Or maybe it's that they realize the work is serious, maybe we don't have to take ourselves so seriously. So there's a bit of informality. They tend to lighten things up. They'd like to have a fun, engaging climate. And by the way, when you're millennials, it feels like perhaps they're pushing your buttons on what do you mean we're going to have fun at work? We wouldn't call it work if we were supposed to have fun here, is they want these things for everybody. They're aware that we put in a lot of time, energy, and effort, so could it possibly be a little bit more fun? And the balance of the list are our coaching tips, techniques, ideas, things that give you the opportunity to grow and develop your millennials. Time with the senior leaders, an opportunity to take advantage of their connectedness. They come in as natural collaborators and have an orientation to team. So as our hierarchies become flatter, our organizations are more team dependent. You've got natural leaders who intuitively bring people together. Acknowledge that they're a confident generation and absolutely appreciate their contribution.
So as you earlier were talking at your tables about the opportunities and challenges, and probably both associated with millennials. Before we dive into what's really special about millennial leaders, it's worth circling back and if you could recall your conversations a bit. Because the list of coaching actions that Diane just shared with you actually falls into those 3 buckets of challenge that we often see in organizations. So if your conversation sounded a lot like, we've got some communication challenges in our office, this might be the list for you. And what we'd like to point out is everything you would see here is very personalized. This is not the generation that benefits from the rubber stamp approach to this is how we're going to do every single thing. We call this list conversations that count. And it means asking, how are things going for you? Interesting. What kind of skills do you bring to our workplace that you haven't had a chance to use yet? Millennials come to us with tons of skills, and often we try to put them in the box of that job role. So we say, have a conversation that counts, and let them know that counts. In this room, one of the reasons Diane and I are so excited to be with you today is that we are not always with groups like this who are mission-driven. And we ourselves are mission-driven. And so we were thinking about what's the great opportunity as you bring in new generations, right? So help them connect their work to your work. Someone said to us not long ago, after I spent a day stuffing envelopes for our mail-out campaign, I kind of lost sight of all the great work we're doing here, right? I was doing grunt work for a day. Yeah, we have to do those things. Make sure people are connecting those dots. If the conversation at your table sounded a little bit like, so, how do we create this empowering climate for millennials? For everyone to consider, when you walked in the room today, you brought with you a personal weather system. Some of us have weather that is stormy. Others are rains on the way. Some people are partly cloudy. Some of us are sunny and bright. Lightning strikes ahead. And so when we walk through the doors of our offices, we bring with us our weather. And in essence, we create a very real work climate for folks. So for you, think about what is the climate you bring. It doesn't cost money to create a positive, results-oriented, productive work environment. It doesn't cost money to have a conversation that counts. We say there are a couple of phrases to purge from your vocabulary immediately. One of them is, we tried that there, we tried that idea. We tried it maybe 7 or 8 years ago and it didn't work out. So thanks for that great idea, but we're doing it this way, right? Because what we rob is, maybe it didn't work out, by the way. We rob the opportunity for learning. So watch for that one. The other phrase we say to really watch out for are any variation of pay your dues and earn your stripes, which actually come from a military background, which most millennials are like, what on earth does that mean, right? But it, has a real origin. But watch for language like that is disparaging and discouraging. If the conversation at your table sounded a little bit like, well, how do we create a jungle gym? What can we do? The number one thing we find millennials saying to us is, I want in the game. I want to do the cool stuff, right? You boomers, you Xers, you created this organization. You're out there interfacing with the board, the community. We want to do cool stuff too. So take them along. Maybe not in a starring role, but in a learning role, sure, right? And start giving that information back to them. Here's how you're doing. Doesn't have to be a big deal at all, but let folks know how are we doing and make sure that they see how they can get growth and learning out of your environment. We find millennials often a surrogate for I want more learning is they say I want a promotion. I've been here 4 months. I'm a specialist 1. And now I'm ready to be the manager of the team. And you're saying, there's 3 levels between here and there, right? So what you've actually just heard is a request for how is the work I'm doing right now helping me learn and grow? So don't freak out about those expectation statements, right? It's then dive in, right? Well, what kinds of things are you doing to manage your career? Which direction do you want to learn and grow? What might not be obvious to you is here's how this is building you towards something else. Now, it probably strikes some of you that this may take a bit more time than you're used to spending day to day. The great news is we can do it. We can flex. And yes, the awareness that it may take a different kind of time is important for us.
Absolutely. So if we could shift gears just a tiny little bit. We've been talking about the millennials. We hope that we've given you some insight into who they are, their incredible talent, their strengths, and their potential. What I'd like to talk a little bit about are the millennials who are in leadership roles. And what does that mean to us as organizations? And I was just doing the quick math in my head, and I don't want to dampen anybody's day, but I want to remind us that the oldest millennial is 35 years old. Mm-hmm. And there's tremendous potential that they are in a leadership role or ready for a leadership role in your organization. They are the millennials, whether they are employees and or managers, are 1/3 of the U.S. workforce and growing rapidly, soon to be somewhere around 46%. So as we mentioned, they are the future, they are our legacy. 15% of those millennials are currently in leadership roles in organizations. So if you haven't noticed, if that is not replicated in your workplace, be aware that it is what's happening in terms of shifting demographics. And 20% of mid-level corporate employees are reporting to a boss who's younger than they are. What we didn't tell you is behind the scenes of getting into the work around generational differences, was our own corporate experiences of meeting new vice presidents. And if I had known how to text at the time, it would have been, OMG, he's younger than me. And I was unprepared to be working for someone who was actually significantly younger than I was. And I thought, how could you possibly be old enough to have the wisdom, the discernment, the experience that we've come to expect? And what we realize is that leadership looks different, and it isn't always successful simply because of your age. What we know about not-for-profit organizations is one of their top 3 challenges is to retain new leaders. This, frankly, is not much different than the corporate world. Many organizations are successful attracting. They can bring millennials into their organization, and they can grow them up to a point, and they can't retain them as leaders in their organization. So we'll talk about some things that you can do. The emerging leaders, and maybe this offers us some insight, under the age of 45 suggest that the lack of an opportunity to grow and develop professionally, to not see opportunity for advancement, is what causes us to be dissatisfied, disconnected, disengaged, and eventually to step out of the workplace. And if baby boomers were dissatisfied and they whined at the water cooler, Gen Xers were dissatisfied, they walked. And millennials are walking about twice as fast. We got a bit of a pass with the recession, but really the lack of an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to develop will cause your millennials to look for the exit. And from the millennial leaders themselves, what motivates me is the opportunity to get new stuff in front of me, to learn new things. And if I'm not doing that pretty consistently, pretty constantly, then I lose my own personal motivation. So how do we keep them motivated? And the question that we also ask is, again, this is a bit back to the stereotypes, are millennials prepared to lead? And in fact, the perception is they are not. And that then becomes our responsibility to make that happen.
So 2 years ago, we were very curious about the statement that Diane just made. Millennials are not prepared to lead. And we are actually great advocates for the millennial generation. And part of our call to action for ourselves is to help lead millennials out of the unuseful stereotypes. So we embarked on a piece of research. We created a research project built around 400 millennial leaders, their managers, the people who worked for them, and their peers and coworkers. So many of you in this room would say it was a 360 effort. And we interviewed them, we surveyed them, we focus grouped them, and we said, okay, yeah. I am actually a nerd in disguise, so yes, thank you for being kind. And we researched the heck out of it, actually, and we said, okay, give us the straight story here. What are millennials winning at as new leaders in our workplace? Where do their strengths lie? And then if we need to help this generation realize their promise and potential, what are their vulnerabilities? And I would say one great piece of advice that we got from our research was, you know, we gathered it all together. There were flip charts, PowerPoints, graphs, beautiful graphs, a lot of them. And then we got some great advice inadvertently, which was, you know, helping our millennial generation exceed and excel does not require a lot of work. And this came in the form of a real-life lesson that took place at Starbucks. So it was a Thursday morning. I walked into the Starbucks that I often go to, ordered the tall, non-fat vanilla latte, and Corey, who has made this beverage for probably 2 years, a great millennial. He just became his shift leader at the local Starbucks. But today there was something different. Today, Corey had a Post-it note on his equipment in front of him. So I thought, this is the secret. I am going to save $3.15 by getting the recipe. I look around, take a look at the Post-it note, and it says, don't say dude. Don't say dude. So I said, so Corey, what happened? And he said, oh, the trainer from Starbucks was here doing, the customer audit thing, and they noticed I called too many people dude. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, who aren't you supposed to call dude? And he sighed and he said, people like you. Right? And it was a great lesson, right? Don't make it harder than it is. One simple Post-it note. It wasn't a 45-minute dress down of Corey, you're saying dude too much. It was, hey, Corey, here's a little reminder. Watch out when you call people, dude. So with that ethic as our advice, we said, so what have we learned and what can we do about it? So what we learned that by a landslide, there's probably not a person in the room who would be surprised that millennials are fabulous at technology. What really surprised us was millennials saying, here's why. The reason is we want to help our teams be better. We see our teams are doing things kind of in clunky ways, and we can really use this to help our organizations move faster. And we also heard millennials say, and everyone around them, call them effortless multitaskers. Well, we actually don't believe in multitasking. We think it's, you're rapidly switching your attention from one task to another. But whatever you call it, millennials are used to lots of stimulation. So a truth-telling question for us when you go back to your offices is, what kind of stimulation do we see in our work environments? And then the broad networking capabilities of millennials without parallel, acknowledged by everyone. Now, on the side where we can be most helpful, what is more difficult or challenging? Millennials and everyone said to us en masse, how do I get respect around here? People are looking at me and I look younger than them and they think I don't know a thing. I'm not the person who founded this agency. I'm not the person who did this. How do I get respect? And we also heard everyone say, and how do we help millennials use the fundamental management skills that older generations sometimes have acquired, and by and large have acquired? Things like delegation, performance review processes, resolving team conflict. That was a huge one for millennials. They said, help us learn how to resolve team conflict. And last, patience. Millennials were saying to us, boy, this is challenging, and leaders of millennials were saying, they're at my door saying, let's change this, let's go. What do we do about it? So what do we do about it? So if you were taking your PowerPoint handout which these slides are tips, right? If you were taking this back to your office, in the spirit of not making it harder than it is, we have learned that the number one best way for millennial leaders to gain respect from their colleagues is to become great listeners. Not good listeners, great listeners. Millennial leaders, the other thing, it might not be fair, it might not be right or wrong. Other generations want to see you sweat a little. They want to know that you are there in the morning and you are not the first person out at night. So that means something to other generations. It doesn't mean you have to spend your life doing it. It doesn't mean you can't help other people learn other ways to work. But for millennial leaders to get their creds, this is very helpful, to be there, to ask questions, to acknowledge the expertise that other members of your team have. As well, the acquisition of fundamental leadership skills. And along the way with that, we noticed that EQ is very important for emotional intelligence is very important for millennial leaders to acquire and learn. So in our organizations, and this is famously done in the corporate world, in large corporate world, we say, all right, here's our annual performance process, here are all the forms, good luck everybody, and we do compliance. Make sure everything's done by September 30th. And millennials are sitting there with a stack of forms saying, okay. So the thing to think about is, can you just create a simple talk track? If you lead a millennial leader, can you sit down with them and say, hey, have you ever done a performance review before? Well, let's kind of role play it here, right? So it's doing all of that blocking and tackling thing. And by the way, the onus is on us to delegate and to not hoard the work for ourselves. The onus is on us to be great examples to millennials. So what every millennial needs to know is why. every millennial leader, because think about it, they're often getting it from their team, right? Why aren't we doing outreach this way? Why did we use Twitter? I think, Snapchat would have been a better way to go, right? They're getting it from their teams. So your role is to help them build their street smarts in your organization. And we do that by talking to them about the how and the why and the background and the context of our organization. So Diane is going to share with us some very specific things that we now need to know and do regarding our millennial leaders.
Absolutely. Thank you, Devon. And I'm thinking that everything you've heard about the millennials has encouraged you to want to make them a part of your organization, a part of your team. And that begins with recruiting. And we know that that's where it begins for all employees. The better the recruiting effort, the better the new hire, the better the success of engaging and retaining that employee. What you might want to pay attention to is messages matter. Devon just dropped a couple terms. Ooh, I'm not sure, was it Twitter? Was it Snapchat? And I'm wondering, does everybody in the office know what Twitter and Snapchat are? And our suggestion is, if you're making a concerted effort to recruit millennials, where are you placing your messages? Are they warm? Are they friendly? Are they inviting? Are they inclusive? Do they highlight the challenge? Do they describe the opportunity? And for goodness sakes, if you're recruiting millennials, don't send us, send other millennials. Millennials want to hear the story of your organization from people who are part of their cohort group. If you remember, as women coming into organizations, we were looking for other women. Minorities are oftentimes looking for other minorities. Right now, millennials are looking for other millennials to join an organization and to share in that story. And then the other message is, the number one reason that millennials leave our organizations is that they're bored. It's absent that challenge and stretch. So let them know that they will be challenged. There's lots that is going to stretch and grow them, and in fact, they won't stand a chance of being bored. So you get them on board, you bring them into your organization, and I can remember so vividly my first corporate experience with onboarding. I walked into a very large corporation, and there was a desk behind a gray panel, and there was a phone on the desk, and the absence of technology will give you more insight into my generation. However, someone said to me, "Welcome, here's your desk, here's the phone, have at it." That is not perhaps the best way to onboard someone or orient them to your organization. However, it was what we did, and it was not unexpected. Doesn't mean we loved it. What we've learned from the Gen Xers and now particularly from the millennials is that when we are onboarded and oriented and integrated into organization, we think there's going to be a buddy who's going to be there with us to do that, or we're going to have a mentor, we're going to have a coach, we're going to have a friend. Remember those definitions of how millennials want to be led. And oh, by the way, I'm going to have a boss. Some millennials would suggest to us that the orientation or onboarding process is from 90 days to 2 years. You may be aghast at 2 years and say, I got to accelerate the learning curve a little bit faster than 2 years. But in fact, that is a period of vulnerability when you really want to continue re-recruiting and move to accelerating the learning curve and fully engaging the millennials on your team. And our answer to that is coaching. We have never met a generation who will more benefit from coaching than the millennial generation. And if you're a Gen Xer, you're thinking perhaps, boy, this sounds like a bit of time. We would suggest from a very practical perspective, it takes more time than if you were coaching your peer Gen Xers or perhaps even coaching a member of the baby boomer generation. What we can tell you is that it's worth it. And if you have a bit of a formal, structured, hierarchical environment or climate, maybe it's time to relax the rules just a little bit. So we've talked about things to think about as you recruit, your messages matter, to engage, coaching counts, and now you've got them on board and you want to retain the millennial generation. When the millennials first came into the workplace, their average tenure was about 11 months. And some people are thinking, ooh, I barely got them in here and they're slipping out the back door. Why would I want to grow and develop them? And we know many millennials that have been with their organizations 10 and 11 years. And we see strong recruiting efforts, great onboarding, tremendous coaching, and an environment that cultivates the collegial, collaborative, team-oriented atmosphere that millennials are looking for. And oh, by the way, if you had noticed one of the bullet points on the slide, about 98% of millennials are looking for growth and development, and they think that's an incredibly important metric to determine their success and satisfaction with their organization. And I thought the thank you that you expressed was so beautiful, because what we know is that 86% of the people in the US workforce feel unappreciated. And that means simply no one says thank you. So if you too could remember the beautiful example we saw this morning of thanking people and then celebrating those successes, those opportunities. And if you're thinking, oh my goodness, these things are so simple, or are these the messages that resonate in my head from walking out the door and listening to my mom? They are simple. And one thank you is not going to engage every millennial on your team, but they are small incremental steps that make a tremendous difference. And we highlight them because they're missing in our workplaces today. So leave it to a baby boomer to talk to the youthful culture and keeping our culture young. Yes, I know we spend more money on cosmeceuticals and pharmaceuticals to maintain that youthful look. And I would share a part of that message with you, which is to invest your energy in creating a youthful culture. And we define a youthful culture of one that is curious, wants to learn, asks people questions, interacts, dialogues with one another. And we do know that the more generationally diverse your organization is, the more successful they are. But the question is, do you make an effort to create a youthful culture and acknowledge and encourage people to experience their full potential as they're working for you?
When millennials and millennial leaders win, then our organizations thrive. Thank you so much for your time and your invitation to be here today. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you very much.